Welcome back. I'm here with Adrian Mouat, a long-time listener, first-time caller. That's not really true. He's been here since the beginning. All right, a few shout-outs before we get into the next talk. Chair Yoga's just happened. We've got more music later on this afternoon. If you're on Umbrella, you're automatically entered into a 200 t-shirt raffle, so one of those might be coming your way. Also, if you're part of the pumpkin carving earlier, or if you're busy carving your pumpkins now, we will be drawing the winners later on with, I believe, Tom Crow from Equinix Metal, but I've got to check that. I think the cocktail masterclass is still coming up, some podcast fun, and of course, throughout the day, you should be posting your costume photos onto Twitter with the hashtag Software Circus Fest to see if you can win that competition. Lots more still to come. I think we've got about 6 hours more of content, but I've got Adrian Mouat here. How you doing, Adrian?
Matey. Bad. It's a little bit.
I feel like we need a costume contest, and then like a how much energy you bring to the role contest. You'd be in about third place so far. Anyway, I'm going to get out of the way. Adrian's going to be talking about a bestiary of container registries today. Are you ready to go?
I am.
Take it away.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about bestiary of container registries. And basically, I'm just going to try and go through different options you have when selecting a container registry, especially in light of recent changes to Docker Hub that may be making you think about such things. But first off, what's a bestiary? Well, it's a medieval encyclopedia of animals, both real and legendary. They are hilariously inaccurate. So what you probably didn't realize is this isn't a mythical monster. It is, in fact, a crocodile. But to be fair, they weren't intended to be sort of accurate depictions of nature. They're more intended to be allegories. So in this example, it's eating a naked man. I don't understand why the man has to be naked, but it's eating a naked man. And apparently the crocodile would eat people and then cry afterwards. So it's a symbol of hypocrisy. They're often allegorical. Another great one is here. So apparently beavers were hunted. Well, the story is beavers were hunted for their testicles. So in this case, we've got somebody that successfully caught somebody's testicles, but this beaver has got wise to the plan. So it's biting its testicles off and leaving them for the hunter so it can escape. And the allegory is apparently that men should give up their vices so they can escape from the devil. Okay, so onto registries. As you're probably aware, registries are where we keep container images effectively. And also now other stuff. So as well as container images, you can get like CNAB bundles, Helm bundles, Helm charts, and WASM bundles. And registries, are essential for a lot of our cloud native work, and especially for Kubernetes, but we don't really give them a lot of thought. So what are some of the questions you should ask when selecting a registry? So I've come up with this thing called CRAS. So cost, how much is it going to cost you? And that's not always that straightforward because they tend to charge in different ways. How reliable it's going to be. And I don't just mean in terms of like the uptime for things like Docker Hub, but like what happens if the Docker Hub was to go down? Have you architected like a redundant system so you'd still be able to deploy, for example? Auditing, so can you find out who pushed and pulled what images and when? Security, so one of the major things here is like scan images for known vulnerabilities, but we're also talking about things like provenance, which is being able to assign images so you can prove where they came from. Speed, I'm surprised we don't talk about this one a bit more actually, because if you can get your images onto nodes faster, then that increases deployment speed, and that affects how quickly you can react in the case of like an outage, and just increases your general deployment and iteration lifecycle. So I split all the available registries up into hosted options and self-hosted options. So hosted options are ones that can go to like a software as a service website and upload to like a remote registry. And I further split this into generic and cloud provider ones. So the generic ones are things like Docker Hub, which everybody's used, I'm sure, Key or Quay.io, the GitHub container registry, JFrog, which I don't have time to look at, unfortunately, and Bundle.bar, which I also don't have time to look at, but it's quite interesting. It stores like it's designed around storing very small images. There's also most of the cloud providers also provide their own sort of registry solution. So on Amazon, you've got ECR, Azure has ACR, Google's got their artifact registry, and Alibaba have one, and DigitalOcean have one. Yeah, then we've got our self-hosted options. So these are the ones you can run yourself. So things like Docker distribution, which we know a lot of you probably know just as a Docker registry. Key can also be run on your own. You can either pay to host it on-premise with support, or you can also just run it yourself from source. There's Harbor, which is like a Docker distribution ++, Trows, which is our own container registry from Container Solutions. And JFrog can apparently run on-prem as well. There's also some specialist ones that we don't have time to look at again, but Zot, which is like a reference implementation of the OCI distribution spec, Nexus from Sonatype, and then a really interesting one is Nixery, which, as far as I can tell, allows you to download Nix packages as container images on the fly sort of thing. Yeah, I don't have time to explain that properly, I'm afraid. But yeah, from that, we can see there's a lot of different choices there. And we want our clients to be able to work with all of them. So the standardization is really quite an important thing. And it's actually, there is a standard as part of the OCI Open Container Initiative, the OCI distribution standard that defines how a registry should work. It is based on the old Docker distribution standard, but they've taken it, sort of reworded it, made it a bit more standardy. And it actually, in the last couple of weeks, it went 1.0 for release candidate 1. And there was a lot of work that went into that. So congratulations to everybody that was involved there. And as well as a standard, they do also have a suite of conformance tests that you can run against your registry and see if it conforms to the spec or not. And if you do that, you will find there's actually relatively few registries that pass all the tests. At the time of speaking, there's only the Azure Container Registry, our own Trows solution, Zot, the reference implementation, and bundle.bar, which is sort of a specialist one for small images. I should, however, say that there's good reasons for some of them not passing all the tests. For example, different registries handle image deletion in different ways that perhaps don't entirely agree with the spec. And in those cases, it may actually be that the spec needs to change slightly. Okay, onto our different registries. So the first one I'm going to start with is the daddy of them all, the Docker Hub. So I've given that one a dragon. Apparently, this is a relatively unusual depiction of a dragon because it's breathing fire, which was not normal, apparently. Two very important features of the Docker Hub. It represents the base namespace. By that, I mean, if you don't specify a registry when you do a pull, so if I do Docker pull Debian, it assumes you mean the Docker Hub and pulls that image from the Docker Hub. Also, there's all the curated images available in the Docker Hub. So, you've got like Debian I just mentioned, but other distributions like Alpine, Ubuntu, etc. And then you've got things like Nginx and WordPress. So it is a fantastic resource for getting started with using software and containers. And I think that's really one of the things that's been pushing forward cloud native adoption. So some of the features in Docker Hub, they have recently, or as an ongoing process, they're bringing back Security Scanner, which is fantastic. And it's actually through an integration with a company called Sneak, not Snick as I thought, it's apparently pronounced Sneak. And they also are planning to build in CLI support, I believe. And it's part of this idea that vulnerability scanning should be part of the inner loop of development. So whilst I'm, developing away, building my Docker file, I should be getting instant feedback if I'm using like images with vulnerabilities, for example. At the minute, I believe you need to have a paid account to get this integration. I think they may be coming with some a free tier. I'm not quite sure, so don't quote me on that. Automated builds, yeah, very much. You probably use this. It's basically like CI/CD on the Docker Hub. You give it a link to like a GitHub a Docker file in your GitHub project or whatever, and it'll build a Docker image for you. So before going any further, I kind of think we need to talk about the changes that are coming to Docker Hub. I've given this like a bat picture because bats are scary, or look scary, but in reality, they're probably not going to hurt you. Now, there's two changes coming in. One is rate limiting. That's happening on the 1st of November, so in a few days. And it is important to understand what's happening here. Then there's retention policy changes, and they're not coming. They've been delayed until the middle of next year because they want to build some more tools for seeing what's going on in your repositories first. So rate limiting. This affects pooling images. So it's at the client side that the rate limiting comes in. So if you do like 100 Docker pools in 6 hours and you've not logged in, you're going to be rate limited. That doubles to 200 pools if you've done like a Docker login. And if you're on a paid plan, it's unlimited. This is based on GET requests and manifests. So it's not per layer. It's like one pool is one image effectively. So for most of you working from home on your laptops, it's not going to affect like your sort of build lifecycle, because I don't think you're going to hit this at all. Remember, you're not going to make a pool if you already have the image cached, for example. But there are several scenarios where I think it is going to hit you. One is like if you're in an office or university or whatever, and there's a lot of you behind a NAT. Then if you're not logged in, you're going to hit this. And that's probably also going to be the case if you run a course or something and all your students are behind the same NAT. You're probably going to have to ask them to authenticate so they all get a separate pool quota. The bigger problems come like if you have a cluster or your CI/CD that's all behind the same behind the same NAT. Then I can see definitely hitting these problems. I believe if you're running in JKE, you probably won't hit this problem because they have settings. I think they have some level of caching automatically for Docker Hub images. So you'll probably be okay there. But if in a couple of days you suddenly find you aren't able to pull images properly, it might be because of this. And sometimes people don't realize that they are pulling like images from Docker Hub. So it is something to definitely be aware of. Retention policy. This one I don't think is scary at all. Basically, images that haven't been pushed or pulled in 6 months are going to be deleted. And that seems fair enough. At the minute, there is 15 petabytes. Let me repeat that number, 15 petabytes of data on the Docker Hub, which is an absolutely ridiculous amount. And they figure that this rule will allow them to delete 10 petabytes of that data. It only affects free plans. So if you pay, you're not going to have your data deleted. And they are bringing in new tools that lets you see when the last time your images were pushed and pulled, etc. And again, this isn't happening until mid-2021. And pricing, so I've got to say, it's actually not too expensive for the Docker Hub. Interestingly, they charge per user. Okay, so be aware of that. And also there are project plans for open source. So I think you can get a discount for those. Key Yokoi. So I've chosen the elephant here, which is apparently the mortal enemy of the dragon. But I'm not sure that's what's going on in this image, because it looks to me like they're a couple. The dragon's having a rant about something, or I don't know, maybe it's stubbed its toe or something. And the elephant's just rolling its eyes like, oh, not again. So I think that was a lie, and they're lovers. Key comes in hosted and self-hosted versions. You can get security scanning, which uses Claire, which is this open source security scanning solution. Claire's really pretty cool. But one thing I kind of want people to be aware of is that not all security scan solutions are equal. Okay, so what Claire does is it looks at the package managers. So Yum and apt and so on, gets a list of the packages that have been installed with that and compares that to a CVE database, which is effective, but it's also kind of limited because it only catches like a fraction of the software on your image. And I think some of the other solutions, especially the commercial ones, can do a bit more there. So do be aware of that. One thing that they spent a lot of time on is like giving you auditing support. And one really cool feature is this time machine idea. So if you push repeatedly to the same tag, you can actually go back in time and retrieve old versions of images that used to point to that tag, which sounds pretty cool. They also have authentication integration, so you can like integrate with your own LDAP, etc. And if you're using the SaaS version, you can again do the GitHub stuff and webhooks and things like Docker Hub. They also have a BitTorrent download option. I think that requires you to use a separate CLI tool, so it's not Docker pool, it'll be like QuaceCTL tool or whatever it is. And that allows you to download faster by using multiple nodes at the same time. It's all written in Python, and it has actually been open sourced on GitHub, so you can run it yourself for free. Just grab it from key/key. You can also run it, you can pay for to be run in the cloud or host it on-prem with support. Interestingly, doesn't seem that expensive, but it is charged per repo as opposed to per user for the Docker Hub, so be aware of that. And you may want to choose the appropriate one depending on what's cheapest for you. GitHub Container Registry. So following the changes to the Docker Hub, I can see people wanting to move to the GitHub Container Registry as or in addition to the Docker Hub, so that people don't get rate limited when they pull. And this is a picture of Unicorn. Haven't looked into the story, so I'm not really quite sure why they're killing the poor thing. I think they probably want to steal its horn. GitHub Container Registry. So that is free for hosting public images, and it does support anonymous pools. As far as I'm aware, there's not going to be any limiting, etc. It integrates really nicely with Actions. So if your project is hosted on GitHub and using Actions, it should be really easy to stick your images in the GitHub Container Registry. There are relatively limited features compared to some other offerings. It's just like a pretty standard registry, though. No scanning or whatever. Okay, onto the cloud provider options. So this apparently is a Hydrus. And the green thing is, which you may remember from the first picture, a crocodile. So the Hydrus woke up one day, went down to the beach and saw a crocodile sleeping with its mouth open and thought, I don't like that guy. I'm going to crawl inside its mouth, as you do. So the Hydrus crawled into the open crocodile's mouth and out through its stomach to kill it, as you do. Apparently, it's an allegory about Christ escaping from hell. Yeah, so nice thing about the cloud provider stuff is they do integrate with cloud tools. So you're going to be using the same IAM, etc. They should be pretty fast, because you're not having to go all the distance from your cloud VM out to the Docker Hub. It should be on the same sort of network infrastructure. And typically they have some sort of support for moving images between regions or geo-replication so that you can have your images in multiple regions. Do be aware the pricing's a bit non-intuitive. It's probably going to charge you both for storage and data transfer. And data transfer particularly comes in when you're pulling images between regions. So if you're pulling from a registry in Asia and your node or your container is in New York, then you're getting charged. Google Artifact Registry. I'm not going to look at all the cloud provider registries. I just want to point out some interesting features of a couple of different ones. First, this isn't a centaur. It's apparently a monocentaur, which I think means this is a donkey and not a horse. So it's half man, half donkey. And it appears to be attacking a snake or a serpent or something. I don't know why. Google Artifact Registry is the next version of Google Container Registry. I think it's still in beta and bits or maybe alpha or something. Interesting thing, and I think this is, hints at the future for all registries really, is that it doesn't just support containers, it also supports Maven, Gradle, and NPM packages. So yeah, going beyond containers. It does have vulnerability scanning, but it's described as using like CVE databases for Debian, Ubuntu, Alpine, and RHEL. To me, that sounds a lot like what Claire does. So I wonder if they're actually using Claire under the covers, or perhaps like some fork or off Claire. It's got this concept of multi-region repository. So normally when you push to the Google Artifact Registry, the name of the registry you use will determine which region you're using. So it'll be like a US registry and an EU registry, for example. But there's also multi-region ones that will replicate between the various regions for, I presume, at a slightly higher cost. And I think some of the other cloud provider registries work in a very similar way. But one thing I want to highlight about the Google offering is this idea of binary authorization. So they've got this idea that you can sign your images with attestations. And this sort of helps verify things as they pass through the supply chain. So when I test, so when your image passes through the test phase, you can be signed to say it's passed the test. Similarly, you can sign it once it passes the vulnerability scans to say there's no critical vulnerabilities at the time it was scanned. And you could even have like a manual QA step or something. And all that data would basically be attached to the image. And then when you deploy the image, you can use something like Critus to deploy to the cluster. And you can say, don't deploy any images that do not have these attestations. And I think stuff like this is going to become more and more important as we try and secure our supply chains and software. So I think that's actually quite a vulnerable point at the minute. Azure Container Registry. That's a Griffin. Uses Docker Content Trust, which I thought was quite interesting, which allows signing of images. It does have a similar sort of support for geo-replication. Interestingly, they use Qualys for vulnerability scanning. Now, I haven't looked into exactly how Qualys works. I do suspect it's going to be a bit better than the Google offering, but I don't know that for sure. Also, they support multiple types of artifact, and basically they use this ORAS thing, OCI Registry as Storage Standard, which allows you to more or less store anything inside a compliant OCI registry. And most important is they pass all the OCI conformance tests. In fact, I kind of want to give a bit of a shout out to Microsoft here because they've been heavily involved in the OCI distribution standard and also in this content trust standard. So they've been working hard with the community there. Self-hosted options. So I like this picture. I have absolutely no idea what's going on. It kind of looks like whoever drew it thinks that the purpose of a hedgehog's spikes is to steal apples or pears or whatever that is. Yeah, so self-hosted options. One thing I want to point out, these can quite often be used with like other options like Docker Hub or Quay or whatever. And they can act like as a local cache. So you get your images quicker rather than going all the way to the key. You can also use them to control what runs in the cluster. So I can say my cluster should only run things from my registry. And then you can control what goes in the registry and therefore be sure of what's going into your cluster. Perhaps most importantly, it allows you to remove the dependency or hard dependency on remote registry. So for example, if Docker Hub has an outage, you can still deploy software by pushing it to your local registry. Okay, so time for the quiz. I want people to comment in the chat and tell me what animal that is. And I'll reveal it at the end. So what animal do you think this is? And it's probably not what you think it is. Again, I told you they're hilariously inaccurate pictures. Okay, Docker distribution. Stable and reliable. Yeah, it's been around for a while. It's well tested. We know it works. One of the really interesting features, and I think it was a bit of a difficulty, made development a lot more difficult, was they support a bunch of storage backends. So as well as being able to store a file, you can also use like cloud provider storage, like S3 buckets and so on to store your images. It's written in Go. It hasn't seen much development in recent months or even years. I do believe that Docker are sorting out some new maintainers, so this may change in the future though. It does bring us nicely onto Harbor. This is a Manticore with a rather jaunty hat. So Harbor is based on Docker distribution, but adds a whole bunch more features. So we've got a graphical user interface. We've got a vulnerability scanner. Or vulnerability scanner integration. You actually bring your own vulnerability scanner. So you can use, for example, Claire, or you could use Aqua Security, etc. Also adds support for role-based access control and includes a notary server, so you can like use signed images, etc. I know they're also working on integrations with Dragonfly and Kraken, which are peer-to-peer distribution things. I'm quite curious as to how exactly that works. I know like Dragonfly and Kraken are both fairly heavyweight and require changes to your cluster. So I'm curious as to exactly what that's going to look like. The final one I want to talk about is our own solution called Trow. And this picture is of a caladrius. So a caladrius is a bird that if you're sick, it would come and sit on your bed and look at you. And if it looked at you and flew away, it would take your illness away with you. So quite a useful thing to have about a caladrius. And yeah, just like Trow is quite useful. So Trow is our own registry. It's been written from scratch in Rust. It's designed from the start to work with Kubernetes. So we've added stuff like admission controllers and so on to integrate with Kubernetes. It's OCI conformant, so it passes all the OCI distribution tests. and it works as a sort of normal registry well at the minute. We do have a bunch of future plans for it though. Some of the key features we really want to add are like an advanced distribution mechanism. So something like what you see with Dragonfly and Kraken, but a lot simpler and easier to install. But again, using some sort of P2P style technology so we can quickly distribute images around the cluster and decrease the time it takes to do updates and deployments. We also want to look at auditing and security. So being able to tell what's changed in the cluster, who's pushed what when. And I think that gives you a really good idea of, just what's happening in your cluster by looking at the progress of images. And security in general is important to us. Okay, that's pretty much all I want to go through. I'm not quite sure how I'm doing for time. Let's go back to the questions that, it's Mark. How are we doing for time?
You have 9 minutes left, but I have lots of announcements to make as well. So we could go back to questions for a little while, unless you've got more slides you'd like to share.
Not really, just let me wrap up and then I will be back with you. So I just want to go back to the questions I think you should ask. Again, crass. So think about the cost of your solution. Think about how reliable it's going to be, not just in terms of like possible downtime, but what happens if one component fails. Auditing, so can you tell what's been going on in your registry, who pushed what when? Security, so vulnerability scanning, and also provenance. Can you tell where your images have come from? Speed, I think that's really important and will become more important, and that's looking at things like region replication and distribution technologies. I do have more things. I can't remember what they were. And I will share these slides and I put all the references for everything there. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to me, and it's back to you, Mark. I'm about to say Jamie, because you can't Jamie.
Yeah, sorry, it says Jamie on the screen, doesn't it? We'll have to fix that in a moment. Thanks, Adrian. Fantastic talk. Hot topic right now. Obviously, there's a lot of choice in the market. You asked at some point what the animal was. Let's have a quick chat. I said that it was an elephant. Willem
an elephant.
Said a whale. Kingdon said a seagull. Nikki said an eagle. J. Herman said a pufferfish. Anonymous said pufferfish. And Marcel said a whale. And Bala thinks it's an octopus. Who wins?
You are looking at the same image, right? It's this image.
I feel you might be getting trolled, mate. I think that's what's going on.
It's actually an oyster. I'm not sure if I still share my screen, but
you are.
Okay, cool. It's an oyster. I don't think whoever drew it had seen an oyster, which, I mean, I understand them not having seen a crocodile, but I'm a little bit surprised they hadn't presumably seen an oyster.
Looks like there were some more animals later on for us to guess if we'd like to keep this round going. However, there are some actual questions about the technology if you'd like to answer those.
Cool.
Okay, cool. So let me see. Q&A for a moment. Jay Herman asks, is that API compliance test available publicly?
The conformance test, yes, it is. And I've got a link right at the end. It's a little bit hard to find for no real reason. If you Google for it, you will eventually find it, but it's at github.com/opencontainers/OCI conformance, and then you'll find it under distribution spec.
Great. Okay, so we're getting more animal suggestions. An angry oyster has come in now. Jay Herman says that JFrog Artifactory is a chimera, by the way. One of the very useful features is it supports dozens of package formats, and if you have got more dollars, X-Ray can do scanning for you. So there we go.
I did actually. I was going to mention it, but like in my previous run-throughs, I was going over time.
So I guess we're going to post these slides somewhere afterwards. If you do have more questions for Adrian, you can find him either in the Brella app or on the Slack or on Twitter. Apart from this deck, if people are interested in knowing more, are there any sort of resources that maybe you use to create this that you could refer people to that might be interesting?
Well, I mean, I put everything in the references. I don't think, I mean, one of the reasons I did it is I don't think there's really a good overview of the various options. Or I didn't see one anyway. It is kind of an evolving area though. I guess the conformance test results in themselves give you an idea of what's out there, although it might be a bit misleading because, like I said, just because it doesn't, a registry doesn't pass all the tests doesn't necessarily say anything particularly bad about it. Some of the cloud providers are actually pretty bad at passing the tests.
Cool. Okay, so reach out to Adrian if you've got more questions around that. We'll share the slides after the conference, of course. I've got a few announcements about the conference, so let me get into those. However, we've got 5 minutes left. So if you're listening and you've got questions, drop them in and I'll come back to you in about 60 seconds. Adrian, have you been watching the other talks today, or have you just turned up for your own?
I turned up for about 10 minutes of Jamie's and Thralton over drinking Stella.
Oh yeah, that's right. That was you. I remember now. Funny how I knew that was you, even though you had an anonymous name at the time. Good. All right. So let's talk about some of the things that are coming up. Directly after this, all of the tracks fold into one, which is this track, where we're going to have a panel session. Your Worst Moments in the Cloud is the title. And we've got Brian Cantrill, Ann Curry, Rain Leander, me moderating, and Sam Newman. So that promises to be good. We still have cocktail workshops coming up later on. And of course, the results from the pumpkin carving competition, which will be judged by, I believe, Tom Crow from Equinix Metal. Also want to give another shout out to our sponsors. That's Equinix Metal, Cycloid, Giant Swarm, Instana, and Kinfolk. They all have booths that you can go and have a look at in the Brella app. Various staff in each of those. I believe they've all got interesting giveaways and things like that. If you're looking to see what's coming up later, I believe we've got, what are we on now? 3 o'clock. So I think we've got 6 more hours of content, 5. I can't do the maths right now. A lot more content coming up, talks, panels, lightning talks, and more keynotes to come. You can find those either in the Brella app under the agenda, or you can have a look at softwarecircus.io to get all the information. Also, as I mentioned a few times earlier, everybody who's joined the Brella app today will be automatically entered to a raffle for one of the 200 t-shirts for this spooky edition of the Software Circus. We've got another chat item coming in. Kingdon says, I hadn't heard of Trow or of the OCI conformance test. I'm interested to know what my registry doesn't pass on, since so few do pass. So yeah, definitely ping Adrian when you've run that. Are doing. Of course, throughout the entire day, we've got the costume contest going on. If you take a picture of yourself and post it to Twitter at Software Circus, hashtag Software Circus Fest, we'll be picking winners later on. I think when we did this in May, there were relatively few entries. It looks like people have really come out with full power today. So I'm expecting many more. And I'm currently trying to concentrate. You at home won't be able to see this, but somebody's just joined the chat. Well, I won't give it away, but let's just say there's a very interesting costume coming into the panel shortly. I think what we can probably do is leave it there, go into some hold music and wait. Any final comments from you, Adrian, before we leave?
No, it sounds good. It's a great lineup for, especially for the panel. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it myself.
Great. Okay, so back here in exactly 2 minutes for the panel. Thanks again, Adrian. Bye-bye.
Okay, I'll see you all in the chat.